So hello, everybody. My name is Lenore Callahan. I think you all know who I am. I'm with the GEPIC Project. I'm a postdoctoral research associate working with Brian E. Hoskins, Professor Brian E. Hoskins, who's in the room, who you will see in a few minutes when we turn the camera. So today on our international GEPIC International Online Seminar Series, we have a really special guest. We have Professor Stephen Drinkwater, who is the Deputy Dean of Faculty, the Faculty of Business and Law, and Professor of Economics here at the University of Roehampton here in London. And he was previously a reader in economics at Swansea University and a senior lecturer in economics at the University of Surrey prior to that. He's also been employed as a research fellow at the University of Portsmouth and Manchester Met University. He's also a research associate at several institutions. I'll just name a few: University of Manchester, the Wales Institute of Social and Economic Data, Research and Methods, and UCL, University College London. Today, Professor Drinkwater will give a slightly different presentation than what was previously advertised. The reason for this is, it'll become apparent, yeah. It'll become very clear to you. We'll leave that as a mystery, but he'll be giving a talk about his paper on gender differences in voting, evidence from the 2019 general election, which you'll see is more related to the GEPIC project, right? And so just to give you all a little review of what will happen, I'll hand it over to Professor Drinkwater, and we'll have record the discussion, or record the presentation, and then after that, I'll turn off the recording, and then we can have a sort of an open discussion with Professor Drinkwater. So without further ado, here you go.
Okay, thank you, Lenora, and thanks everyone coming in the room and also in the ether as well. Hopefully this will work okay. So I'll try and stand here where you can see me, and then Lenora will be mine.
Lenora, just check that they can hear this well enough.
Yeah. So I just want to ask everyone if you can let us know if you can hear us, if you can hear Stephen, and if you can see the presentation.
Yes, we can see the presentation and hear.
Fantastic. So we're doing well.
Okay.
So you go ahead.
So, could you go back up one slide here? Right. Okay. So thanks, Laura, and thanks everyone as well. So as you can see from the title, we'll talk about 2019 general election, and also in terms of voting and gender differences. And as we indicated, hopefully that ties in neatly to GEPIC, but at a slightly kind of different level. But hopefully we might be able to sort of tease out some of the links there as we go along. So this is me, and those of you on my team later, Colin, my co-author from King's College London, so I hasn't come too far, but it's nice to have him here again. And this is early work, but it kind of builds on some of the research that we've done in the past, both collectively together and separately with other individuals as well. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so as Lenora was mentioning, and what came round initially was that this paper was actually going to be more on sort of polarization. But there's a couple of reasons why that's changed. One reason was, as I said in the bottom there, we do have some work which is ongoing with that, but there's been some issues with the data, and research systems we've got in Swansea has already recently taken their post. So we do plan to do some work on that, particularly looking at political polarization within households, which I think is quite interesting. And again, that could link to GEPIC. And that's part of a longer project, or wider project, which you mentioned, Wizard. We'll use that acronym rather than the full one, where we've, obviously I've worked in the past, but I had 2 lots of funding from the ESRC, so Civil Society 1, Civil Society 2, and the bit of Civil Society 2 that I was particularly focused on was this project on political polarisation, particularly with colleagues in Swansea, particularly David Blackerby, who people might know, been on about 6 ref panels and things. So we've done a bunch of papers there, so you can have a look at them. I'll just pick out actually a few, which I actually think link to some of the research which is going on within the business school and by colleagues, particularly in POSE. So got a paper here which is looking at polarization, job polarization. So it links in with the presentation which we saw yesterday in the CIP event by Marchietta and Zita, in the sense of those people who've been left behind, more sort of flexible jobs and fared worse in the labour market, how that then linked to whether or not they voted for Brexit. And there's, again, literature on this in the US with Trump as well. And then paper with Colin, published a couple of years ago, which is looking at whether people regretted their decision. Again, we looked at different types of that as well. And then another one here, which just looks at the NHS, whether people who, what they thought the impact of Brexit was in the NHS, but also those people in the health workforce, how did they vote in relation to Brexit? And then finally, here's kind of recent paper, which is looking at how the self-employed voted in terms of the Brexit referendum. And actually, there's an interesting gender result here. It's very different in the sense of women, self-employed, were more likely to vote Remain, so if they wanted to stay, whereas men were much more likely to vote Leave. Okay, so we do explain that in different ways within the paper. Okay, so that's it for today in terms of Brexit. We might come back to it later because it does feature a little bit in our presentation, but not too much. Okay, I won't be giving out too much of the game away. Even though it's the 2019 election, in some ways, surprisingly little of it is about Brexit. Okay, so, okay, next slide, please. Is it about 30 minutes, 40 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start a very brief introduction and motivation, and maybe this is an aspect that Colin will be doing more on in due course in terms of literature and whether there's a theoretical model we can use here as well. So, and then that's combined there with the literature review, actually combined those sections now. The data I'm going to talk about predominantly today is this data set, Understand Society, which people might be familiar with. Actually, Yian might be using it in her PhD, but basically it's a big household panel, which is now much bigger than it initially was. It was initially the British Household Panel study. And I'll say some of the, I guess, the good features of it, maybe some drawbacks as well, but certainly for people who are interested in looking at social and to some extent economic phenomenon in the UK, obviously we're looking at political as well, it's really useful data. Hopefully get to look at that. And it's freely available, downloadable, which everyone can do in the university. Descriptive statistics, and I will actually say something about some polling agencies as well in terms of the results and how to compare those with the one we're getting. And then I'm going to not to do too much econometrics, but a little bit in there, statistics and econometrics, just some basic models. We'll get on to conclusion. Should say, just mention open just back here. And even though I say voting differences, I will talk about different parties, but the key variable we're looking at here is why you voted for a particular party. Why did you vote for Labour? Why did you vote for Tories? Why did you vote for Liberal Democrats? Particularly look at the gender differences, but also look at other differences as well. Okay, so I'm not going to say too much about this, and in some ways it's not an area that I know a lot about. Colin might know more. He teaches these courses in King's. But basically, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that initially, to some extent, some of this surprising. So the women were less likely to participate in politics. Again, just as relevant for GEPIC, they're less likely to vote. Obviously, there's issues about getting universal suffrage and things at the start, but in the early times. But then, as well, they were more conservative than men initially. But then paper and work by Inglehart and Norris, and actually I think Colin went to a conference the other week in King's where Pippa Norris was there, wasn't she? So she's still active and obviously a big name in political science. They actually looked at cross-country data and they found out things had changed, that women became more likely to vote and also they became more left than men. And there's various explanations for that, but again, won't go into them, and there were some debates as well, but this seemed to be a pattern which was happening across many democracies. And it's still true that the gender differences in turnout are relatively small. And that's in many countries, including the UK. But there are some sort of, I guess, caveats to this as well, is that a lot of the evidence is focused on general elections, which we're looking at today. But there's a number of papers, particularly by Costeca et al. And again with Dusnoville, and they look at the difference between sort of first order general elections and then second order things like European elections or local elections and things. And they find that actually there is a difference in second order elections compared to first order elections, with women less likely to vote. And another thing which could be relevant today, and in some ways I'm not going to focus on because we're not going to look at turnout, partly because potentially this reason, is that it actually it appears that males overestimate that they vote in surveys. They say, yes, I did vote, and they didn't actually vote. Okay, and I think there's probably some evidence of that in national society, and that's partly why we're not looking at that aspect today. And also because the differences are small as well. So if you look at the UK, there's a number of papers that look at this over time, and again, it's sort of picking up on these trends. So Shorrocks has done quite a lot of work on this, looking at gender differences, and again finds evidence that there's very small gaps in terms of the turnout gap, and again that sort of subsequent or continuous cohorts of women are more left-wing than men. Okay, and again there's some recent papers there that find that that, you know, it shouldn't be 2016, I think it's 2021, is that these gaps are tending to get bigger as well. Okay, so as I said, what we're going to focus on mainly today is why did you vote? Not why did you vote at the ballot box, but why did you vote in the way you voted? And there's a number of different reasons for this. So Blythe has done quite a lot of work on these types of areas, but you know, might be sort of some familiar concepts here. So you're voting for a party because you know, you've been associated with them, partisanship. You're voting on a particular issue, which obviously Brexit could be an example there. You're voting strategically, as in you're in a constituency where your party's not going to win, so you want to vote for another party to give them a better chance of winning. Negative voting, you don't like either any other party or a particular party, so you vote against them. Cleavage voting, where you've got, you know, particular groups are associated with particular parties, okay, so traditional voters. And then economic voting, which, you know, as an economist, I'm not going to say too much today about, but you vote in obviously whether it's the economy as a whole or your individual benefits from a particular party. Okay, so these are different types of voting here. So what we're going to do, essentially, the question we're going to analyze captures all of these different ones. So it's asking people, it didn't identify why you voted this way in the election. Was it for one of these reasons? And as I say, why I think this is, I mean, in some ways quite different from some previous papers, is that we can then identify which groups are more likely to vote in different ways. So we can look at gender differences, but also age and so on. And again, why I think it's different is this question that people in the past have looked at, say, strategic voting or negative voting or issue voting, but they tended not to look at them all together. This is what this question enables us to do. Okay, so talk about the data, understand society. Again, you can find out lots of information about this on the web, but it's a very large sample size. Okay, it's actually diminishing over time as people leave it, but it still enables you to look at different demographic groups, which is quite unusual for survey data. So in total, I think in the wave I'm using, there's about 40,000 individuals, but obviously we're looking at voters and things, so that's going to be reduced as well. The other thing to note as well, that since its inception, it's oversampled ethnic minorities, okay, by design, but there are weights included to control for representation, okay, and certainly in the descriptives I'll use weights, but in practice it doesn't matter too much, not in this context. Again, as people might be aware, it is the UK Household Longitudinal Survey is the name, so it's a longitudinal survey, so you can track people on households over time. However, I don't actually think it's going to make much difference because we're only interested in looking at a point in time, the most recent election until this year, so it's the last election, 2019. So we're only going to use a single wave. So wave 12, which is between 2020 and 2022. Actually, wave 13 is now available, so you can do that, but it doesn't actually ask the question that we're looking at. So this is good enough for us. So I said, we're looking at the 2019 general election, and as I said, why you voted for a particular party. So I'm just going to go through a bunch of descriptive statistics first. So the first thing I'm going to do is compare the Understanding Society data to post-election surveys by Ipsos. They're actually called Ipsos now, not Ipsos Mori, they changed their term, I looked at that earlier, and YouGov, okay, just to see how representative or similar the data is. And just a kind of bit of headline findings here, and I think this is obviously, and actually very unusual for the type of research I do, is actually they're very similar. So they're almost identical, especially if we look at aggregates. So even if we look at men and women as a whole, or the whole sample, the numbers are almost identical, which is obviously good and it's reassuring. So that's indicating that may not be much problems in terms of self-reporting, and also that obviously that the Understanding Society is a representative survey. However, we split down by age groups, we do get more differences, possibly not surprisingly. Again, and that's where sample variation could come in. So what we tend to find is that there's over-reporting of Labour voting amongst younger males. And an interesting one is that amongst younger females, they over-report voting for the Greens. Can you say the next slide? Okay, so I'll just show you these there. So if you look here, you've got the Ipsos results, the YouGov results, and Understanding Society. And basically, Ipsos and YouGov are pretty much identical. So if you look at it as a whole, about 45% in the last election voted Conservative, slightly higher men than female. And you can see that's pretty much true in YouGov. And then for Labour, higher proportions we noted earlier amongst female than male, okay, about 3 to 4 percentage points. Lib Dems about 11-12%. Others, again, 11-12% as well, 11% as well. We can break them down, and we do that to some extent in the paper. So the two largest in the 2019 other parties were the SNP and the Greens. Okay, so Greens are about 3% and SNP about 4%. If we look at Understanding Society, as I said, the numbers are identical, but they're pretty close. Okay, so we've got males and females roughly the same, slightly higher for males in terms of Conservative vote, and then Labour vote. Males is slightly higher than in the polling agency, but the females is pretty much identical. And again, similar in terms of Liberal Democrats and other votes as well. A little bit higher, and also mentioned that earlier, Green females than we find in the polling agencies. Okay, next one, please. I've just highlighted a couple of figures in colours here, so you can see with this is females, that in Understanding Society, older females were slightly less likely to say they were Conservative voters than in the survey data, in the polling data, whereas for those older females, then obviously they were more likely to say they were Labour voters than they were in the polling data. Not many other differences then, apart from, as I said, if you look at the Green Party, 10% of females aged 18 to 24 said they voted Green, compared to only 4% in the polling data. And 6% said in the 25 to 29 that they voted Green, compared to only 3%. Okay, so there is a difference there. And again, that might be just saying, oh, I'm a Green supporter, even though they didn't vote for Green. Okay, we can't tell you. But overall, again, not too bad, I think, in terms of representing how the vote went in the election itself. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, it's made on. Okay, so they're fairly similar. Again, a couple of things to note here that, as I said, younger males, 18 to 24, more likely to say in understanding society they voted Labour. 61% compared to 46% in the polling agency, and obviously less than were voting Conservative. Amongst the older age group, though, again, slightly higher, saying that they're voting Labour than in the older age groups, and again, obviously less with the Conservatives. But other than that, there's not that green vote that we saw with women, in the sense that it doesn't vary so much. Okay. Okay, so I've got the question back, but I can carry on because especially because we're up against time a little bit. So basically, this question said, how do you vote? Why did you vote for the particular party you voted for in the election? Okay, and you're given essentially 7 options, okay, which correspond to what we were saying before. Is I always vote that way. Always voted that way in the past. Other people voted the same way. It could be family, they could be friends. Party-driven considerations, candidate-driven considerations, strategic voting, because of Brexit, and negative voting. Okay, so it's like the other party. So those are the kind of 7 options. But in addition, we have other responses. We have refusals. Saying, I'm not going to tell you. Okay? Don't ask me, or why should I tell you? And also, don't know. Why did you vote? I don't know. So again, so I would say those are they're not very helpful, but they do reveal certain information about the individuals. We also have some very small ones here which are encoded, and actually, I'm not sure what encoded is. I was thinking, is it somebody saying something really rude, as in, why so I can't got a code there? And then there's another which is like, oh, because it was a nice day or something like that, you know. So, but these aren't very big. Thing to note here again, the sample sizes are pretty big, okay? So about 10,000, just under males, and 12,000 females. So we've got quite a large samples here, which is obviously, enables us to do quite a lot of work in terms of statistics. Just a couple of things then to note here, just in terms of differences between males and females. That females are more likely to refuse, okay? 22% compared to 20%, or to say don't know, 12% compared to 9%. Also, more likely to say that I voted, I've always voted that way in the past, but less likely to vote for Brexit or Brexit reasons, and also the negative voting as well. But otherwise, not too much difference. Those are the key differences. What about if we look by age? And we find some bigger differences here. So we're looking separately now, females and males. Again, firstly, females. Those refused are much younger. Okay, so we've got 31% of the 25 to 29 year age group are saying, no, I don't tell you why I voted that way, compared to 14% of those 65 or older. Whereas don't know, so the younger people are saying, well, I'm either refusing or I actually don't know why I voted that way. Okay, 21% compared to the 9% then of 65-year-olds. Again, sort of you can ignore the uncoded or other, but if we look at the other sort of what you might think of as those kind of positive reasons or stated reasons for voting, those who are older, maybe unexpectedly are more likely to say I've always voted that way. Whereas younger people, well, obviously they wouldn't have voted very much at all in the past. Other people voting that way isn't important for none of the age groups. Party-driven considerations is more important for young people. Candidate considerations, not very important. Strategic voting, a bit of a mixed picture, it's around about 10%. And then Brexit, again, unexpectedly, not important amongst younger voters, is more important amongst older voters. Negative voting, again, so might say the younger people are not so negative, but also remember there's more being captured by these sort of not respondents, really. Okay, next slide. In terms of, for males, relatively similar patterns. So refusals and don't know are higher amongst younger age groups, but they're not as high as they are for females. And if you look at the older age groups, over 80% are saying they give a reason, okay, rather than not refusing or don't know. Again, the same pattern there with always voted the same way. Other people voted the same way. It was actually a little bit higher for 1834, so males, and I say, well, somebody else is voting that way, so I'm going to vote that way as well. Party driven is very steady, and so candidate driven and strategic voting as well. Brexit, a bit more sort of going on here. Again, it's lowest for those younger males, but it's becoming more important then for older males, which is in some ways what we might have thought was driving some of those decisions. You think about the Red Wall up in the north in the 2019 election. But according to this, we haven't looked at it regionally yet, we have some regional controls, is that it's not going, but that's one thing we could look at in terms of in the northeast, how much more important was the Brexit reason than it was in other parts of the country. Negative voting is quite high again amongst older males. If you want to look at by party, there are some differences. Again, a couple of things to note here. Both Labour and Conservative, 30% people voting for those parties are saying, I'm not going to tell you why I voted for them, or I don't know. Whereas it's less or lower amongst Liberal Democrats and Green voters. They're saying, we know why we're voting for these parties. And surprisingly, for Greens, it's for party. Okay, right, 40% saying, I vote for the Green Party because it's the Green Party. For Liberal Democrats, again, quite interesting, maybe not that surprising in the sense that quite a lot are voting strategically. Okay, so you've got somebody who's in a Labour supporter in the south, where the Liberal Democrats are going into Tories. I'll vote for the Liberal Democrats, even though I'm a Labour supporter. And then candidate driven as well, a little bit of Liberal Democrats. Interestingly, again, I guess we had Corbyn in Labour leader in 2019. Only 2%, less than 2% of Labour voters said they voted because of Brexit reasons. Okay, whereas for Tories, it's more important. And obviously, look at the Brexit Party, you can identify them. 19% of them said they voted for Brexit, and another 19% said they voted it because of negative voting. Okay, but again, even the Brexit Party had the highest percentage saying, I'm not going to tell you why I voted. Okay. Yeah, next slide. Again, similar patterns for males, maybe sort of more stronger. So again, in terms of Liberal Democrats and Greens are more likely to say why they voted. And again, for Greens, almost 50% say it's because of this, because of the party. And 24% of Liberal Democrat voters are saying they voted because of strategic voting. Again, interestingly here, being from Wales, used to say about certain seats being very much passed down through generations. Used to say, put a donkey through the town, the red rosette is going to win. So maybe sort of evidence of that. About a quarter of Labour supporting males say, I've always voted that way. Brexit is not important again for Labour, but particularly for Tories, again, both in terms of males, the Conservative Party and in particular the Brexit Party, males are saying Brexit is obviously a big deal for males. There's also a little bit of uncoded things, and again, I was just thinking, are they saying, what are they saying in these responses? We don't know, but it's interesting that it's harder for males than females. This one is looking just at male and females, okay, and also just Conservative and Labour voters, okay, because obviously those are the two largest parties. And what we find here, they're relatively similar for males and females. For females, slightly higher proportions of both Conservative and Labour supporters, like we saw before, they don't know, okay, than for males. For females, always voted that way, is higher for Labour. Okay, and also party considerations is higher for females than it is for males, whereas Brexit is higher for males, certainly in Conservative for males, and then again, negative voting is higher amongst males for Conservative voters as well. Okay, so sorry. Yeah, so that was the younger ones, I think. So this is the next one. So yeah, so that was under 30s. This is 30 and over. Okay, so there's slightly different patterns here. So again, Brexit supporting and negative voting is high amongst male for Conservative voters. Always voted that way, again, is high for Labour supporting males and females. Party considerations, again, higher for them both. And strategic voting relatively high for Labour supporting females as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, in the remaining sort of 10 minutes or so, is just briefly go over some sort of regression results. So I'm going to estimate two basic types of models, which is a binary loaded model, where the dependent variable takes a value of 1 if no reason is given. So they're either saying, I'm not going to tell you, or I don't know. Takes a value of 0 if somebody says it's for one of those reasons, strategic voting, party, or so on. And I'm going to estimate basically sort of 4 models here. One which is a basic model where we just got limited controls. Okay, so that's, if you look here, we've got gender, age group, qualifications. Okay, and also marital status and region. And then we add in other controls then in the augmented specification where we've got, say, economic activity, whether you're a student, retired, working, and so on. The party you voted for, your ethnicity, and whether or not you're UK born. And when we add in these more variables, we lose observations, okay, because there's some non-response there. So we'll estimate these models firstly for the full sample, and then also both into the basic and augmented. And then we're going to look at the under 30s and also just females aging 30 as well. As I said, those are the controls. And then the second one is a multinomial logit, where we report for just those people who state a reason, okay? And they say, I'm voting this way, okay? So how do they compare against each other? And here we compare it to the always vote that way. So that's like the base category. So we compare relative to that. Okay, so yeah, that's what we're going to do. So first of all, we look at the full specification. So we have there the positive sign, these are marginal effects, and the probability value. So that's indicating with this full specification that females are about 6 percentage points more likely not to give a reason, okay, which is consistent with before. So you ask them, why did you vote? And they either say that they don't know or I'm not going to tell you. Okay, so that's controlling for those basic characteristics. And what we find is, if you remember this, the same with the descriptives, it's not changing that much in some ways, that as you get older, you're more likely to give a reason, okay, which is why they've got those negative signs and they're significant as well. So in this model, we don't have qualification. In the next model, we do, and then we lose some observations as well, but it doesn't change the dummy, essentially. It's still the same about 6%. So when we control for education and those other variables, it doesn't change very much. But obviously, education in its own right is important. So if we look at those people who've got, and this is relative to people with degrees, so the 3 categories are A-levels and equivalent, other qualifications, which includes GCSEs and things, and no qualifications. They're significantly more likely to say, I'm not giving you a reason. Okay, so the more educated people are more likely to say, it's one of those reasons that I'm voting. I have a clear reason for voting. I'm not going to say, I don't know, or I'm not going to tell you. Okay, if we just look at 18 to 29-year-olds, and what we find here is the female dummy massively goes up, and this might be interesting for your thing. So there they're saying 12 percentage points to a female aged 18 to 29. Why did you vote? I don't know. Or I'm not going to tell you. So they're voting, okay, but they're not telling you. Right. And again, look at the effect of education, not so much on no qualification. Remember, actually, with this group, no qualification is going to be quite small. It's going to be much bigger here because people now tend to have qualifications. But those people who have sort of GCSEs and things, 16 percentage points more. So education is kind of driving this in the sense that the more qualified you are, the more you know you're given a reason for voting. If we just look at females on their own, so obviously the dummy goes here, what we find here is that, again, education. For those females who've got a degree, they're 20 percentage points more likely to give a reason. So that's a much bigger difference than there is for females there, because that's the combined model. Okay, so that's saying education is at least giving you, or you actually give a reason for voting if you're more highly educated. And that's bigger for females than it is for men. Right, so this is quite a complicated, but I'll take you through some of the main things here. So I said, you're comparing now to those voters say, I've always voted that way. Okay, so it's compared to them. So if we look at, again, the female dummies, we've got a few of these positives, a couple of negatives. So what is this indicating? So for females who say, I vote that way because other people are that way, they're slightly more likely than males. Okay, it's just about significant, 0.005, so it's not a very big effect. Females are also more likely to say they vote for candidate reasons, because I like the candidate. But they're less likely to vote for Brexit reasons, as we saw before, when we control for all these effects, and they're less likely to have negative voting. Okay, and this is all age groups. Okay, I could do it for smaller age groups, but you're going to lose observations. It's going to be more difficult. In terms of ages, those people who are older are less likely to vote for party reasons, but the other effects are relatively small. They're not significant. In terms of education, those people who are lower level educations are more likely to say, I vote that way because other people vote that way. Which might be surprising. Your parents vote that way, or your friends vote that way. Whereas those people who are more educated are more likely to vote for party reasons. Okay, and that's probably something to do with the Green Party. Even though we control the party here, those people who vote for the Greens are more educated. They know why they're voting for those parties. And again, strategic voting, again, possibly not unexpected. People who are more highly educated are more likely to vote strategically. Okay, that's it. Last slide. Okay, so just to, I guess, sort of sum up, then what we find is that females are less likely to provide a reason for why they vote for a party, either because they say, I'm not telling you, or because they don't know, say they don't know. This is in a general election. So it's 1 year in a general election. Other elections in different years, we don't know. Okay, maybe that variable looks at other years. And remember, this is the kind of Brexit election where people actually are not saying they voted for Brexit reasons according to when they're asked that question. And as we found, this is much more extreme amongst younger age groups. So young females, aged 18 to 39, are very likely to say, why did you vote? I don't know. I'm not telling you. They're not given a reason. But having higher qualifications and degree reduces the extent that's an issue. Okay, so the more qualified you are, the more likely you are to say you want to give a reason for voting. So those who give a reason for voting, females are more likely to vote for a party for candidate-driven reasons, but less likely to vote negatively or about Brexit. Again, graduates are more likely to vote strategically and for party-driven reasons. Okay, and just, and I mentioned it a little bit there. So what we're going to try and do, I think, next is look at the sort of differences within the UK a bit more, because we have data on different parts of the UK. And I think, partly because I'm Welsh, Colin's from Northern Ireland, he lived in Scotland, now we both live in England, so we're obviously looking at different things. And also, even with Northern Ireland, you can identify all the different parties in there as well. And because we have a relatively large sample, that we're going to look at. So we're going to look more at the minority parties. I think we found those quite interesting results with the Greens. So there is obviously some differences there. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Jerry, thank you so much for that in-depth, fantastic presentation. I'm sure there's loads of questions and points.
Is there anything in the chat or not?
Is there anything in the chat? That's a very good
It looks like
question.
you've got a transcript for everything you said.
Yeah, they do that automatically. So we'll move on to the Q&A portion or discussion portion of this. So I will stop the recording. So for those who are going to be watching this later, we'll bid you adieu. Thank you so much.